Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome on what is a rather fresh Sydney evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for leaving your warm homes. That's a Sydney concept. To come here this evening to join with us. This session is probably a slight pivot or a broadening out of our more established type topics where we've looked at philosophy, history, we've looked at questions of civil society, freedom of speech, many of the great sort of challenges that we face. We've looked at literature, etc. For this session and our next session, we are going to go to what I think is in many ways the neglected jewel in the crown of Western Civ, to use that protean term. The reality is this beautiful building stands up not because it identifies as a building, but because of physics. And when we look back, you know, from Copernicus, Archimedes to Newton, all the way through scientific development, Pasteur, others, the great continental tradition, the great tradition of science here, I think we somehow are slightly myopic about the enormous achievements that we've seen emerge from not just the physical and biological science and medical sciences. And this country's had a great success. And it's one of those things where I think we're inclined to be nostalgic for the past. I think in this area, I'm very nostalgic for the future. When I look out at, you know, the 30 years of what Brian McNamee did at CSL, when I look at Cochlear, when I look at ResMed, when I look out across, you know, the Canvas, the Atlassians of this world, and those startups that are coming behind, the enormous developments we've had here in terms of science. But tonight is all about the future. And we have been joined by somebody who really has some amazing insights and brings in energy and I think a critique to it. Very often futurists come and they talk about things in the, you know, out to the 2050s and beyond. Catherine Ball is going to talk to us about what's happening right now. And we're going to talk about this in the context of that great unfinished project that is Australia. To some extent we were bystanders, if not, you know, beneficial bystanders to the outputs and the results of the agricultural and industrial revolution, the semiconductor revolution, the changes that are happening in biotechnology, etc. What does it take for us to be really part of the coming revolution that is artificial intelligence, cybernetics, etc. And so she comes with a background in academia. Somebody who made the early fatal mistake of trying to bridge two disciplines. It's death for your academic career. She has survived that. Widely published, company director, investor, very much somebody supporting angel investing, and also bringing a critical eye to our industrial policy agenda in this country with respect to technology, trying to encourage us to be open and to reset. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my really great pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker and to welcome our speaker to the stage, Catherine Ball.
Thank you. I'm going to use my timer to make sure I stay on time. I gather that's a thing here. So my husband likes to stick my head on robot bodies, by the way. That isn't actually a suit that I own. I did have somebody at a presenting gig said to me, "Can you wear that suit?" And I was like, I wish, don't have that yet, but we will talk about exoskeletons and humanoid robots in my last slide, I think, which is going to be a lot of fun. But first of all, I want to ask a question of technology. There we go. Where are we now? Now, who can name the year and the astronaut? I always like to just double check. No, it was the 70s. This one was taken in the 70s, one of the Apollo missions. And it's really funny. I get invited to the most interesting places, and some of the best dinners I've ever had are with some of the old Apollo. Failure is not an option. I just love that. You know, I never met Gene himself, but failure is just not an option. And I was like, that's beyond optimistic. It's very delusional. But that is the sort of the American exceptionalism that if they see a problem, they can fix it. If they see a target, they can hit it. And I think this is where I'm going to pull maybe some slightly controversial things out of my experience so far with academia, both in the UK and in Australia. But if you don't have a target, you miss it every time. And one of the things I've noticed is with ARC grants and CRCs and all of these things that we try and fund, they're always funding the status quo. They're never funding this idea of we will kill this problem by, we will fix this thing by. They're always like, we need this many PhDs, we need this many postdocs, I need this many tenured professors. And we don't ever seem to stop and ask why. And I feel like both in the UK and in Australia in recent years, the role of higher education, both as TAFE and as universities, has seemed to be functional to the economy in very simple terms, when in fact that does it a disservice. If we didn't have the economic engine that was our brains trusts inside our entire communities, be it the CWA, be it a TAFE, be it a university, if we aren't allowing those ideas and those solutions and those problem definers to be able to meet with each other, to get funding to actually solve things, then we're in real trouble. And at this point, I'm going to quote an old boy from 1918 by Nyerek, who was, like me, by my first doctorate, a microbial ecologist. And he used this term, which is, everything is everywhere, the environment selects. Everything is everywhere, the environment selects. So we take that tenet of microbial ecology, and I'm not calling academics fungi and bacteria here, that's not my point. But the point is that everything is everywhere, and the environment selects. So when you are building a culture of knowledge exchange and problem solution, really how you physically create the ways in which you can meet together to even come together to solve those problems is a fundamental part of that ecosystem. One of our hugest problems, and I'm putting a call out to all of you here, that I feel like we need to solve by the end of this decade, is the ability that we seem to have to create silos. We have a really great tech ecosystem, a university ecosystem, a TAFE ecosystem, a Girl Guides, a Scouts. We have a VC ecosystem. We have a government ecosystem. What we don't have is a sense of community. This idea that we are stuck and not able to have conversations, so we don't have neuroscientists talking to quantum professors. We don't have people working out in agricultural fields talking to roboticists. And so when those things come together and converge, that's when magic can happen. And for some reason, the way we fund our institutions in this country, we are not allowing those conversations to happen. Some people are starting. And what happens there is it's normally led by one of three things: persona, pain, or pleasure. And persona tends to lead quite a lot of this. Pain tends to be more lucrative, and pleasure is kind of my preferred methodology around how we come together and solve problems. So the next question, when my clicker works, is, and I will do my AI declaration at this point, that is not a real kangaroo holding up the Tower of Pisa. That was one that ChatGPT helped my husband with yesterday as we were putting the slide deck together. But the idea here is, what does an ivory tower mean? Like, why is it that our universities are being called ivory towers? When for me, my background is as a working class kid from a single parent family in the middle of England. And my access to university and higher education was what gave me wings. My PhD was what gave me enough points to apply for a 457 visa to come to Australia 15 years ago. And it's effectively been the foundation stone for all of my successes. People recognise my qualifications, even if they don't know what it is I've studied. People recognise my networks, even if they've never met with them before. And we have an issue here in that the defunding of our higher education system is meaning that the ivory towers are now leaning over. And what's it going to mean when they fall? And who is going to care? Like when a tree falls over in a forest, if no one sees it, did it make a noise? And that's why I worry that in the West, we seem to have this gradual erosion of the value of higher education to the larger economic engine that we need to survive to the end of this decade and thrive. And the other thing about where this looks to, Europe. For some reason, we always think that if someone goes to the US and has a failed startup and comes back to Australia, they've really made it. They've had a really great go. And they end up on our boards, they end up as CEOs, but effectively they haven't done anything particularly special. It's just that they literally got on a plane and went to a different country, particularly the US. Suddenly they were a failure over there, but they came back triumphant because they'd learned something. They'd been somewhere that no one else had been before. And one of the things I'm noticing with a lot of the corporates that I'm talking with and a lot of the universities that I'm working with is this Eurocentric, North American-centric love that we have had, almost an addiction that we've had for historical reasons, and I'm sure that was fine 40 years ago, they ain't going to cut the mustard in 40 years' time. The rise of the ASEAN as a group and a block of nations is really interesting to me at this point. When we have caps on our student numbers at our universities here, what our universities are doing, or what British universities did 25 years ago, is they're starting campuses in India. They're starting campuses in Singapore. Because if we can't get the students into Australia to come to our universities here, we will go to them. If they can't come here, we will go and build so we can make the money off them there. Isn't it wrong, almost, that we have forced our universities to become financial engines rather than centres of knowledge and exchange of information? And I sit here as an honorary associate professor at the School of Cybernetics because I love the work that we do there and I want to be a part of it, but I don't want to be a financial burden on a system that I don't need to be able to do the work that I want to do. And we've got a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of you in the room do a lot of unpaid work for our universities, with our graduates, and this is what's keeping us all together. And I feel like we need to recognise that a bit more. But what our brand is overseas in terms of our universities has been tarnished in recent years. And what our brand is and our economic engine is to other universities globally is not as good as it was, and it's certainly not as good as it could be. One of the things I love to do, is particularly in the US, is I'll often say, can anyone tell me a really game-changing Australian invention? And they all sit there completely nonplussed. Someone might come up with the inflatable slide out of the plane, the black box, which is incredibly important at this moment after that terrible Air India crash. But we can name them, but I'm asking other people from like the UK and from the US to name them. So they'll sometimes come up with the black box or cochlea or, the first use of antibiotics. Google Maps is a very, very popular one, but they don't realise it's Australian. They have to Google fact check me. But my favourite one that I don't think any of you have actually mentioned to me is Wi-Fi.
Oh, yes.
Right? So Wi-Fi, that fundamental foundation to all of Western civilization, Wi-Fi, wireless fidelity. And when I say to them, do you know how Australia funded that? And again, this is talking to a bunch of Silicon Valley tech bro-esque types, right? So they're obviously thinking, it's some person that came up with a really good idea. I'm like, no, it's taxpayer funded national science research based on astrophysics, where they couldn't move the files because they were so big that they actually had to create a method to transfer files between machines using wireless fidelity. Again, they don't believe me. They sit there and they Google fact check me. Why is it we are able, both in the UK and in Australia, I am a dual citizen, that we are able to celebrate sports, we're able to talk about Hollywood celebrities, but we can't celebrate science? We can't celebrate technology. We can't celebrate innovation. There's a conversation that's gone missing. And that's where I feel these ivory towers will have to topple. Because until people realise what it is when the system is broken and not working and how we're losing out, I almost don't feel like they're going to value it, except I don't want the ivory towers to fall. I want the universities to maintain themselves. So a call to action again. How do we start a new conversation about the value of intellectual property and capability in terms of the economic output that comes from that? So, if anyone can name the university, I'll be very grateful, but here's a little test. What do you think is worth more to the British economy? One university technology park or the entire English Premier League? Now, I'll do a little straw poll here. So who thinks it's the football? Who thinks the English Premier League is worth more? So, one university technology park is actually worth 3.5 times the English Premier League, and that is the Cambridge University Technology Park. The English Premier League is worth about £8 billion a year to the British economy, and the Cambridge University Technology Park is worth about £30 billion a year to the British economy. Which one gets celebrated more? Which one gets more media time, right? And quite frankly, I think that, that we need to start actually asking serious questions. It's kind of funny, but really, why? Why are we not valuing these things that are creating such economic machinery to, the diversification of the economy as well as the actual cash flow? And in terms of job creation, the English Premier League creates about 90,000 jobs a year. One Cambridge University Technology Park creates about 86,000 jobs per year. And if you work out at 3.5 to 1 in terms of the money, how much is that job worth per capita? So wouldn't it make sense that we should be investing in technology translation through things like university technology parks, or the ways in which we can build these gaps, bridges for these gaps between the economic engines and the commercial output and the universities and the brains in which we are creating these things? Can anyone tell me of a good way we're doing that in Australia? And one of the things we know actually is that the people we create from these systems, our graduates, our alumni of our universities, they should be the first ones to be providing a bit of love, right? You'd think. The things when we're in our great careers, if we hadn't had that university experience, life experience and qualification, we wouldn't be in the jobs that we're in, right? So we all give regularly to our universities, yeah? Everyone here regularly gives like monthly amounts of money to their universities. So in the US, about 6% of the universities in general in the US, about 6% of their annual income comes purely from their alumni philanthropy. In our country, it's about 2.5%. And that normally is that's kind of skewed by some very large donations. When I put out on my LinkedIn, how many of you actually support your local university with money, like your alma mater, who actually goes back and gives money back to your university? The level of rage I got in response to that question was quite interesting, not aimed at me, aimed rather at, I'm still paying my HECS debt, why should I give them, those rich, a penny? All the way back to, well, they've never asked me. And the most heartbreaking one for me was, I tried to give them money once and they completely screwed it up and I didn't want to try again. It was a complete waste of my time. So this isn't just on us. This is also on these institutions. It's about having conversations about why they're relevant. Now, what has this got to do with tech and with futurism? Well, the whole point of our economic diversity and our economic engine is based on how we're going to scale new and emerging technologies. And one of the things I know we have a problem with, globally, but particularly in Australia, is we're not commercializing. So in 2022, our Department of Industry commissioned a report, which you can pull off the internet, and in it, it talks about our R&D and then our lack of C. And what it said was, we're pushing R&D, we're pushing things out of universities, we're pushing students into the system, we're pushing grants in to solve things, but there's no pull. There's no commercial group or corporate society saying, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that. So where other university ecosystems are making this work is by having a pull and a push. And that way you start producing a really active pipeline, though I prefer to think of it like the London Underground rather than just a single pipeline, in that people in research can get on and get off at different levels and different colours of tube lines depending on where it is that you're wanting to go. But at the moment we don't even have a train at the station. We have all of this R&D turning up and nowhere for it to go. We have some people trying to create the next unicorns, and that's what the universities like to focus on, is if we spin this off and we own a certain percentage of it, how is it going to make us money? Whereas really what we need is an economic engine whereby all ideas get some oxygen, all ideas get in front of venture capital, all ideas get in front of angels, and we invest our money, particularly unlocking some of the trillions of dollars we have in our superannuation funds, back in. Now, why would that be important? Well, if we look at other people that are doing this well, Taiwan is actually really ahead of a lot of this. So Taiwan, they invest all of their money in their own universities, in their own ideas, in their own producers. None of it goes offshore. All of their superannuation budgets go back into the Taiwanese industry, back into the Taiwanese universities, back into Taiwanese companies. Now, some might call that isolationist. And look, I don't have a problem with this, but I feel there's a balance. And we're not quite balancing yet on this fulcrum of what do we need to make money, but how do we need to also protect our own economic capability? And again, all of these are just thoughts. They're not accusations. Except when I go globally and I see where other countries are doing what we can do and we are not doing it, it's a little bit upsetting.
Just ask you a question.
Of course.
Taking a glass of water.
Go for it.
I mean, one of my observations is that the problem is that the time from initial investment, not just to genuine commercialisation, is sometimes a decade. And that's the typical strategic cycle of a business is 3 years. Mm-hmm. The typical political term is 3 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. And there's a mismatch, it's like a money market mismatch between, investing for the real future, not just for the next 3 years. Mm.
Diversification of the portfolios is the answer to some of this, because there are some people that are angels that will just throw money at good ideas and wait to see what happens. What we're also finding, though, because we have this inability to have a fast answer to people calling for capital, we're losing a lot of early stage at the seed stage. They're going. We have a number of really great robotics companies that I have literally watched on their social media fly to San Francisco, and sit there pitching to an American audience where they've tried to call the National Reconstruction Fund or they've tried to talk to Main Sequence Ventures and they just can't get traction. And so these machineries that we've built to try and assist with some of this, they're still not working. they're still not getting there. And when you look at some of the things like Main Sequence Ventures, which is the venture capital arm of the CSIRO, you can't pull any financial record detail off that publicly because it's a private organisation that's funded with government money. So it's obfuscating. Like, you can't see what the outcomes are. All I know is of the 60 investments, can we just look at that in terms of scale? 60 investments. 60 investments that they have made. Only 3 were female founded. So if we just, take a little pause. What I wanted to do by putting this up was talk to you about something called XPRIZE. So what we see globally and what we're bringing to Australia is this idea of reaching out to global machinery that does work and seeing if it could fit in Australia. And this isn't about cookie cutting. This is about putting an Australian accent on what we see works overseas. Has anyone heard of XPRIZE? Great. It's a 30-year-old not-for-profit that basically created the commercial space industry that's now worth trillions of dollars. And when the first Ansari XPRIZE was won in 2004, so that was 21 years ago, Richard Branson licensed the winning equipment, created Virgin Galactic. And at its IPO, which had been a great investment for a super firm, its IPO was almost $1 billion US. So from zero to a $10 million competition to a multi-trillion-dollar industry in the space of 21 years. That for me ain't slow. That for me is quite fast. And so if we start looking at how we can take some of these new waves of philanthropy and actually support our universities using some of the money that in Australia we're going to see an intergenerational shift and transfer of wealth that's going to be worth trillions of dollars. And I know that the people that are going to be inheriting that wealth don't want it to work the way it's worked in the past. Their kids and their grandkids are asking them what they're doing about the world's problems. And so they're wanting to now have conversations about how they start answering some of those things. So when XPRIZE, I look at it from statistics, it's just one not-for-profit, but if we would just take a pause and look at how we get returns on investment for some things, the statistics that Ryan from the CEO of Science Technology Australia said yesterday or today at the press club was that when you put in $1 actively into an ecosystem that has entrepreneurship built into it as well as science and technology, you get about $6 back for the $1 that goes in. Most people talk about for every $1 we put into innovation or investment in terms of technology coming out of universities, we get about $3 back into the economy. XPRIZE, you get up to $90 back into the economy. So it's just one model of grand incentivized challenges, but for some reason, no one in Australia has ever heard of it. And when I was invited to be a judge 10 years ago, and I got the phone call, I thought it was a radio disc jockey taking the mickey out of me, asking me if I wanted to be part of XPRIZE. But what that was using new underwater drone technology to map the ocean floor. Typically, that was going to take us about 600 years, and what we wanted to reduce that to was 10 years. And now, off the back of the Ocean Discovery XPRIZE, we have seabed2030.org, which it may be more like 2036 or maybe even 2040. But we will end up with a high-resolution map of the ocean floor, which is something we've not had for a long time. And if you think about why that's important, protecting our oceans is part of our climate, protecting the deep oceans, and our biospheres, our deep biospheres, contain some 95% of the biodiversity on this planet. And they're unmapped and they're unknown, and yet we're about to start opening them up for deep sea mining. Why? If you can't map it, you can't know it. If you can't know it, you can't love it. If you can't love it, you can't protect it. And this is where, as an environmental scientist by training, knowledge is power. And if we can show people what's down there, then people will care about it, people will think about it, and people will have to have policy and legislate about it. And then also, it might help Australian assets have more value, because if they can't mine the nickel from the ocean floor, they've still got to get it from Australia, for example. But when we finished that XPRIZE, it was really funny and sad to me. The first thing I had to check was my conflicts of interest. And so I went through all of the lists, thinking I've worked in Western Australia now for 10 years. I should know at least some of the people that have entered this competition. 0 Australian entries. And in the entire 30 years of XPRIZE as a global not-for-profit, I only know about 6 people that have actually gone in and been actually measured in. Now, one of the reasons this is important is because the current XPRIZE that's coming to Australia next year for its finals is the Wildfire XPRIZE. And each XPRIZE is built around a problem statement. Can you detect a fire from space, like basically immediately? Can you use AI to work out whether it's a go, put it out, or no, let it burn, it's fine? And then when you work out you want to go and put this thing out, can you then unleash the flying monkeys, the drones, the robots, the uncrewed systems to suppress that fire within 10 minutes of detection? Does anyone in this room think that's a bad idea, to be able to have that kind of capability in Australia? Do you think I can get $1 out of state or federal governments for this? Riddle me why. Riddle me why. Because I'm not a CRC. I'm not running it out of university. I'm not selling a widget that I can give you a return on investment. But what I can do is stop entire towns being uninsurable and burning down. What I could do is prevent what happened in 2019, 2020, potentially, if this really scales and works. And so I sit there again going, why am I still screaming into this void? Why am I still sitting to a room of really intelligent, educated people, and you've never heard of this? It's not on you. You've never heard of this because we don't celebrate science the way we celebrate sport. We don't celebrate world-changing ideas, game-changing ideas. We have the Eureka Prizes, we have the Nobel Prizes, we have the XPRIZes, we have all of these prizes, but we don't have any traction. And this comes back to my initial conversation about ecosystems. We don't have any community. Now, we're a population of 28 million people. We're fewer than the population of California. Yet we punch above our weight in the way we produce ideas, the way we solve problems, and how we publish papers. We really do punch above the average in terms of the size of our population, but we don't celebrate it. So I feel like this is something we can do before the end of this decade. Now, I wanted to talk to you, again, not a real robot, by the way. Sorry, that is an AI-generated image of a humanoid robot on Bondi Beach was the cue that we put into the ChatGPT for that one. Was what's next? Well, there's so many different kinds of technologies, and I'm happy to take questions about any kind of emerging technology you might be interested in or have seen, because if I don't know someone working on it, give me a bit of homework and I can find someone who's working on it for you. But one of the things I think is going to be really important for Australia is our robotics ecosystem, which at the moment is flailing because we cannot seem to get support. Now, if I was to say to you, robotics, people don't really get at a policy level at federal government. So maybe I need to use the term physical AI. Will I get your attention if I call it physical AI? Because effectively robotics is AI in physical form. And so there are various hypotheses, but there's also money behind this. The Bank of America have estimated that we'll have 1 million humanoid robots operating in domestic scenarios and commercial scenarios and industrial scenarios by the end of this decade. Peter Diamandis, a futurist, produced a report on humanoids, and he said that there were going to be 40 billion humanoid robotics on the planet by 2040. And you might well sit there and go, what? To which point I'm just going to pick this up and go, who has one of these? Right? And if I said 20 years ago, when the iPhone first came out, we're going to have 40 billion iPhones on this planet in 20 years' time, would it have sounded a bit weird? So the reason why this is interesting to me is because humanoid robots are now already, 2 weeks ago, a group called Figure put them onto the car manufacturing plants at BMW in Germany. The AI brains powered by NVIDIA chips are able to perform human tasks, basic human tasks. Might be a bit slow at the moment, but imagine the mobile phones of the, carrying the battery pack. That's where we are right now with humanoid robots. They are training up and working in a hive mind way in which we've never had technology go before. Now, how could this be useful for Australia? We have an aging population. We need more people in aged care. We don't have people even wearing exoskeletons. A lot of our aged care workers are literally popping their backs. The average cost of a slip, trip, twist or fall under health and safety legislation up to $200,000. An exoskeleton, $5,000. Why do we not have exoskeletons on all of our nurses in all of our hospitals already? The Japanese have been doing it for 20 years. And the South Koreans are particularly good at walking exoskeletons because culturally, my very first question, where are we? Our ecosystem. And in South Korea, when you retire, there's a hobby a lot of people take up called temple walking. And to get up to the top of the temple, you've got to climb a lot of stairs. So they have now wearable exoskeletons that almost go on like a pair of pants, and they help you walk up the stairs. Like when I had my babies and I was rocking them in the middle of the night, I could have done, I don't want to hand my baby to a robot. I'd have just like a robot to hold me while I was doing it. Tell me it was going to be all right. Maybe it was the voice of my grandmother who's now passed, which, when we think about death tech, and I haven't even really started talking about some of those things, but the idea that we could have people helping us that may be lost to us, and they will be in a physical human form. But the thing that I do find fun about the humanoid robots is that you could have a humanoid robot helper in your house, in theory, in the next few years. That robot can fold your laundry just the way you like it. It can handle those freaking elastic sheets, fitted sheets. It knows how to fold a fitted sheet. It can clean your bathrooms. It can cook the vegetables just how you like them. It knows how you like your steak cooked. It's not going to bark at the postman, but it's your home security. And all of these things will be available to you for 500 Australian a month. Would you have a humanoid robot in your house? Who can tell me? Well, in fact, no, I'll tell you a story. Everyone knows New York City, right? First skyscrapers in New York City, they didn't have elevators in them. And so the most expensive real estate in New York City, in those skyscrapers, was the ground floor, first floor flats, right? Because you didn't have to go up too many flights of stairs. Then we built an unmanned vehicle. We built a drone. We built an autonomous vehicle, an autonomous car, but we called it a lift. And we put it in that building. And then where was the most expensive real estate in that building? At the top, because you could reach it without any effort and it was exclusive and safe, etc. Now I want you to imagine that skyscraper in your mind and think of our cities. And think of how all of our real estate around our cities is really expensive because we have to work to get in and out of the city, right? Everyone knows that from the Harbour Bridge. Before the tunnels come in, we have to drive our own cars, which are polluting and expensive, and we have to have a place to park them, and we have to have a garage at home or street parking, we have to have insurance, we have to all of these things. But now imagine if I said to you, I might give you an autonomous vehicle that will take you for a ride and then go and earn money for you as an Uber driver during the day and then come home and pick you up again. You don't have to park it, it's working while you're asleep, and maintaining itself. You even have it on a rental, so you don't even own the thing. You're just renting it and it's still making you money, which means you don't have to worry about selling it. You don't have to worry about the asset dropping value. Now imagine that's the lift and this is the cars, and I'm just taking that building and I'm lying it flat. Where is the most expensive real estate going to be? Is it going to be still inside our cities, or is it going to maybe be where the penthouses might be? And we saw an inkling of that during the pandemic. And I've got 3 seconds, so I think I've pretty much set to time. So love the fact that it's got a little cocktail there, but absolutely no ability to drink it. And so this will then come down to these questions of what do we delegate? And in fact, I may just run over by a few seconds if that's all right to ask this final question. There's an AI company out of the United States, and the way it works is you create a deep fake audio of your voice. And the whole point of creating this deep fake audio of your voice is so that you can call your parents or your grandparents, but you're not calling them, the AI is calling them. Would you use that? No, right, all of us are going, that's awful, why the hell would you create that? If I said to you that 90% of the people in aged care in this country have no visitors every year, then imagine that they could have their husband who may have died a few years ago, and maybe they've got dementia, you know, and maybe you want to speak to your nana, but you're working, but she's got dementia, so she gets scared, so you can have it programmed to call her every half an hour to give her an update on the weather and just tell her that you love her. You know, would you use it? Right? So technology isn't good or bad. It's how we apply it, how we identify the problems, how we work as a community to look at how we can fund Australian ideas that are going to solve some of these big problems, such that no American has to ever Google me ever again when I say that something is an Australian invention. That would be a win for me. Thank you so much for your time.